My name's Kira. I am the virtual events coordinator with LifeGuides, helping curate and put together these events with the intention to support you on your journey wherever you're at. Today's conversation is a grief conversation. It's the grief journey, exploring every path. And for us, the biggest thing that we really felt was important to tap into was the fact that most people associate grief with death, which is a huge part of why so many people experience grief. And there are a lot of other ways that we go through grief that don't get well expressed, or have any connotation that we're actually experiencing grief, where if you have ever heard of Brene Brown, she says, if you can't name it, you shame it. So if you don't know what an emotion you're
Mm.
experiencing, if you don't actually know what you're going through, chances are you're not going to be able to navigate through it healthily. And that's where our beautiful guides get to come in. So we have our beautiful guides here. We have Susie Ruth, and she's really wonderful. She has faced the depths of grief following a challenging marriage and really the loss of everything meaningful to her home, her kids, her dogs, even her credit. And a lot of that turned around when she began working with a coach. I feel like a lot of things in life we need support for, right? And through that transformative experience, she unearthed her life's purpose. She followed her heart and studied become a death doula and a mind, body, and somatic life coach and a grief specialist. So we've got Susie Ruth, if you guys would like to welcome her in the chat. And then we also have Taryn, and she's really cool too. She's an award-winning writer, director, producer, and author. How cool. She creates scripted and documentary projects for television, film, and digital media distributors. She has written multiple children's books, 5 actually. And then also, she recently released Inappropriate Laughter, a story of loss, grief, and guilt, navigating. Well, you'll hear her story. I don't even need to tell you her story. You will hear her story. It's pretty wild. So, she also has a self help program titled Script Your Life, which helps clients develop the confidence and self esteem necessary to flourish. So, those are our two panelists. And then we have our very own Dr. Dave. He's the VP of the Guides community, and he holds a PhD in transpersonal psychology, counseling psychology, and a BS in psychology. So he harnesses both science and behavior economics to drive positive change to support everyone's mental health, emotional well being, and human thriving. So I think that we are so well set to have an amazing conversation. And for those of you who are new to Life Guides, you have access to this employee benefit that you get to have conversations with guides about things that you're going through in your life that they have navigated before, that they can now hold your hand and walk you through together. So this conversation is set with the intention for you to see how life guides can support you and to start placing the faces of the people who can help you navigate along your journey. So without further ado, welcome to Grief Journeys. Dr. Dave, I'm leaving it off to you.
Wonderful. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, even though we're having this conversation on on an important day, especially for us here in the States. Today is September 11th, and we know what happened, 23 years ago. Interestingly, yesterday was September 10th. It was also, I believe, Suicide Prevention Day. So we're having this wonderful conversation, I think, at a great time in the world of entertainment. Some people have been lost. For example, James Earl Jones recently passed away. So grief is a constant in our world. It's just something that comes with the human experience. How do we understand our suffering without labeling it? I think it was important for her to mention the Brene Brown piece that once we can label it, or how it says, once you can name it, you can tame it. So I wanted to just start there and let everyone know that this space here, we want to have difficult conversations, but at the same time we want to have fun, and we want to honor those who are with the ancestors, and and also honor ourselves when we are going through changes. So the first question I want to start with, because I saw a little bit of this popping up in the chat, and I want to pose this to you, Susie. Um, what is grief, and what does grief mean?
Oh my gosh, thank you for this question. And I usually, when I have someone for the first time meet with me for grief, I ask them the same question. What is grief? And usually their answer is something like, it's a deep, dark sadness. It's heavy, it hurts in my heart. And I say, of course, that is grief. And I find that it helps to think of grief as more of a structure that we have now in our bodies, like this house, that the home for love that's homeless. And that home contains that deep, dark sadness, but it also contains relief and freedom and joy and anger and guilt and regret and loneliness and all of the emotions that we feel when we're grieving. So when we're grieving, we do feel that dark sadness, and there are days that we feel joy, and there's days that we feel regret. So all the emotions are included in grief, and that we always carry it with us. Once we have grief, it's something that we now have. It's not something that we get beyond. It's not something that we move through, which we just carry it with us, and the grief stays the same, and we grow bigger. We grow stronger around it.
Carry it with us. I'm gonna take that with me. There's so much to work through when we're dealing with grief. There's so many factors, our normal behavior, and Taryn, you have, and I want you to also, wherever you can, sprinkle in your experience, because you have an amazing experience. As you know, I'm a big fan of your work, but I'm interested to hear, how do you or support, or how do you process the guilt associated with grief? Because sometimes there's like this guilt that comes with it. How do you process that?
Well, first of all, grief, Susie, that was a beautiful explanation of grief. Thank you for that. And thanks too for this question, because I think guilt is one of the more difficult things that come up with grief. In 2018, I rushed to my mother's bedside and I sat next to her for 7 days. I was in charge of giving her end-of-life medications. She was 96, and I found her journal, and I got to know her through that journal all over again. And then when she passed, within that 8-week period, we lost 4 more family members. And the guilt that most of us felt during that process, you're always questioning, did I do enough? Was my mother comfortable? But my guilt was about, should I be giving her this end-of-life medication? Is it making her so foggy that she can't have those last words that she might want? Am I doing this wrong? And I think that was the biggest struggle for me. The best way you can process it and think about it is, number one, would she want me to feel guilty for her death? Would my mother want me to suffer when I was doing what I knew I should be doing based on the advice of our hospice nurses, who are a gift from God, by the way? Would she want me to? And of course, the answer is no, for me. The other process is, we know each other, let's say this is our timeline, right? And we've had all of these wonderful, wonderful experiences together, or interesting experiences together. Our relationships with our family members and or friends, etc. Sometimes they're rocky, but we have this experience, right? But we seem to focus on this last little 1/8 of an inch of pain and suffering when someone has left, and we tend to ignore the gifts that we got from that relationship. That is what gave me the strength to go, no, I did my best. This is difficult for everybody. And I went into it giving her that medication, knowing that I was getting good advice, etc. And even though I felt really guilty because I was quelling her ability to communicate, I also knew I was protecting her. And I knew there was no way she would want me to feel pain over taking care of her and making a sacrifice for myself. Because I knew I was going to feel guilty. I knew I was going to feel, what a terrible assignment in general. But I knew I felt good about taking the right advice. So the best thing I can say about guilt is it's a wasted emotion in this situation, because every experience and every emotion teaches you about what you would want, how you would handle it next time. When I pass, and everybody's going to pass, it's the one thing we have in common. When I pass, what I learned from those last moments with my mother made me know how I want to do this, the graciousness with which I would like to end, and how I would never want anybody around me to feel guilty about anything that happened during my passing. So that gives me comfort.
It's important to find that comfort in the suffering, because I like as you pointed that out, that we're all going to pass. And forgive me if I get this wrong, people, but there's a Flaming Lips song where they talk about everyone that will die, and I think it's a beautiful way to put it into context, because we're all moving towards it. It's just about what are you doing each day to enjoy the moments. So I have a question for both of you, but I want to start with you, Susie, and just talk about what to do if you don't get to say goodbye. I see the love flowing in the chat, and I appreciate it, and I want to honor and acknowledge those who have lost people along the way recently. But what do you do if you just don't get to say goodbye?
So I'd like to kind of answer this with a little bit of piggybacking on the last question too, the guilt. So we don't really talk about the terror of grief. Like, grief is terrifying. I think grief is like being dropped in the ocean with no land around and no boats, and you're just out at sea, and you're there by yourself. It's really scary. And that's what grief feels like. And our brain, and this is, Mary Frances O'Connor talks about counterfactual thinking, where our brain will go to guilt, because when you feel guilty, there's power in it. There's something you can do about it. There's something you could have done differently. There's like if only thoughts. And those kinds of thoughts are going to come up because your brain would rather feel guilty or feel that kind of like what if thinking than feel that terror of loss, because there's nothing you can do with the loss. So you'd rather feel guilty. So if you didn't get to say goodbye, your brain is going to offer all kinds of what ifs. If only I had gotten to say goodbye, if only, but understand that it's just simply loss. And it's terrifying. And it's one of the easiest ways for our brains to not feel it is to say, if only I had said goodbye, if only I could have done this differently. And grief loves to have acceptance. And if we can just accept the fact that we didn't get to say goodbye before she died, but we still have a relationship with her. The relationship is never over. It's just very different. We can still say goodbye. The grief recovery method, it's all based on saying goodbye. In fact, the last challenge in the grief recovery method after 8 weeks is to write a goodbye letter and to say, I love you goodbye in the letter. And people have a really hard time doing that, but it's really important for us to say goodbye. And it doesn't mean that we have to say goodbye to them while they're alive.
Mm-hmm.
Helpful. Yeah, what about you?
I actually write a lot about this in my book because, our last goodbye isn't always our best goodbye. some of the guilt comes from maybe, I don't know, somebody walked out of an argument and then the other person passed. So there's that kind of like guilt about how you said goodbye. It's not just if you got to say goodbye, it's how the last goodbye was. And, you know, I joke in the book that because goodbyes are so important, and I've learned that if, and again, remember the book's inappropriate laughter, so that's what I go to. But whenever my husband leaves to like run an errand or something like that, I always try and say, okay, thanks, love you, or you know, you're a good man, I'm grateful, something that will be my last words to him in case he comes home and I'm face down in the bathroom. And you know, I don't want my last words to be, don't forget toilet paper, or, you know, that kind of negative experience for him where he's like, well, that was awful. So what I do and what I teach people to do is to make sure that try to reframe your last goodbye. Since our last goodbye isn't always our best goodbye, there is a moment in your relationship with that person, some moment that you remember that makes you smile. And for me, it was my mother, who was drastically shy. She was born in 1922. She dropped out of school when she was in 8th grade because she was she couldn't be in front of people. Yet, when I was a child, she took me on a trip to New York City by herself because I was a child actress. And she navigated that city like a boss. You would never know that she was chronically shy. And her strength during that moment was so impressive to me. And there's a picture of us together in front of a waterfall, this enclosed waterfall in New York City. And she's got her little plaid suit on in the 70s, and she's holding my hand with confidence. And you can tell she's proud of herself and she's proud to be there. And we had this bonding experience. So instead, I have now learned to reframe my brain. Instead of thinking of her in the bed, weak and struggling and in pain, now when I think of our goodbye, now when I think of her, my brain goes straight to that moment. And I'm filled with the feeling I had when she was with me, because that's what we take from their passing, from our relationship. Susie is right. Our relationship doesn't end, it changes. And so now, instead of saying, you know, I didn't get to say goodbye to 4 of the 5 people who passed in that 8-week period. And I now, every time I think of them, I think of my very young nephew who passed, and I think, I remember working on his skateboard with him. And that's where I've trained my mind to go, because that's the definition of our relationship. That defined our relationship. Our relationship isn't, you know, me saying goodbye or not. Our relationship were the beautiful moments. That was what was real.
And then the way that you're doing that, just to kind of sprinkle in a little bit of neuroscience, you're breaking the cycle by creating new neural pathways and allowing yourself to remember the loving moments. And you're also, even if those moments aren't necessarily as loving as you'd want, you can imbue them. You can kind of view them with a reframe or a perspective of love, compassion, and then almost re-encode it. So this way, when your brain goes directly to it, it goes to that space. That's a wonderful, wonderful way to to improve. But sometimes there's a challenge when it comes to when to ask for support. You know, when is that moment where it's like I just need support. And of course, you know, we have LifeGuides available. I'm going to put in a alternative version. I met Dr. Doty, who created an AI to mental health based AI system that people can talk to when they're dealing with grief, because it doesn't matter how you get it as long as you get help. But when is a good, when do you know you need support? And Susie, I want to start with you with this question. Like, what's that threshold, when someone needs to seek support?
I'm a grief coach. And this kind of brings up Francis Weller's work, which, there's many entrances to grief. I almost feel like I'm in a presidential debate because I am answering your question, but I'm starting with something a little off with where is she going with this. But the 5 gates of grief, loss is one of them, right? Everything we love, we lose, but we also grieve parts of ourselves that were never loved. We grieve the sorrows of the world. We grieve for unmet expectations, things we expected and didn't receive. Oftentimes, we come into this world expecting to, we should have dignity, safety and belonging when we're born. And if we didn't receive those, we have grief. We grieve for our ancestors. We have ancestral grief. So my answer to your question is right now, everyone should get help right now with their grief. It's never too soon to learn about grief, to start processing your grief, because none of us are walking in this planet without grief. There's actually a 6th gate of grief, which is the harm we've done. And I was thinking about it this morning because I'm staying right now. I'm at the Lava Beds National Monument, where they had the Modoc War, which is a super famous war between the U.S. soldiers and the Modoc Indians or Native Americans. And because they call them Indians here, so it's just like, that's just kind of what they used to call them. And this is a tribe of 55 people who staved off 600 soldiers for 5 months. The grief that I feel being on this area, in this land, makes me think that this is probably my life's work, the harm we've done. The grief I feel that we've drained Tule Lake, for agriculture, that we've stolen this land from these people who lived here for 6,000 years. It breaks my heart. And that's grief. And that needs to be witnessed. That needs to be expressed. That needs to have space. There needs to be an acknowledgement for those feelings. Because if I don't feel it, then I can't change it. I can't make it better. I can't do better. So I say everyone has grief. Everyone should get help with it. Be witnessed in it.
So supportive. And I want to also shout out, I mentioned I'm here in Seattle. I'm on occupied Duwamish territory. And just like you, just that knowledge of people who've been forcibly moved from their land. There's grief there. There's grief in changing jobs. There's grief in so many aspects of life. If a kid doesn't get into the school that they originally wanted to because they had expectations, there's grief there. And if you're not able to label it, or even say to yourself and acknowledge what I'm feeling right now, this is pain, or this is suffering. If we can't acknowledge it, we can't move forward. So, Taryn, I want to, come to you with the same question. Now is the time. I think that's going to be our place, Susie, is everyone. Now is the time. But I'd like to hear from you. When is that threshold? When is a good time to seek for help?
Well, here, I had a good experience with the hospice nurses during the process. They explained the physical aspect, so that was helpful to me. And what I have learned in my life about when to seek help in general, about almost anything, is that you should do it right away. You shouldn't wait until you're suffering to get the help. The best way to do it is to initially, when something like this happens and you suffer a loss, step into the guidance and the help right away. Otherwise, you're just putting a Band-Aid on something that will get back at you later. You know, I write in my Scripture Life program, we talk about backstory, you know, for your character. And your backstory has an incredible impact on who you are as a character. And when you don't address certain traumas in your life, that impacts you. Their backstories are sneaky. That impacts you later. Because if I didn't address my guilt with the way I said goodbye to my mother, or or giving her the medications, or the guilt over anybody I've lost, or any events in my life, if I didn't address that and open it up and say, okay, why am I feeling this way? What is drawing me to this kind of pain? Then someday when something else happens, that is going to come up. It's going to trigger you in some way. And I think the key is not getting help after you've already been triggered. When you come up to a point in your life where something you've never experienced before that is impacting you in a negative way, or has the potential to impact you in a negative way if you don't handle it properly, you know, that's the time. The time is when it's happening. You want to prepare for what might come.
Right.
And getting help is not, you know, it will work if you're already suffering. Absolutely, you should get help. But I think the best approach to anything like that is to maybe avoid major suffering, or allowing your suffering to be guided so that you can heal properly. It's all about healing properly and understanding yourself. So, you know, my answer, just like you, is right away.
Right away. I'm hearing the proactive is a part of that too, like just being proactive. And we have a couple of questions. We were going to, wait a little bit later, but I think these questions are appropriate with what we're discussing. So I want to pose a question to both of you. We'll start with you, Susie. So the first question is, how do you know how to deal with grief if there's so many forms of grief? How do you know what path to take?
All grief is processed the same. So it doesn't matter what you're grieving, if it's sorrows of the world, ancestral grief, all of it. The process that I take people through is all the same. And grief needs 6 things. Grief needs witnessing, it needs ritual, it needs space. So space meaning acknowledgement and room to just have the feelings, not doubling down on what you're having. Like people feel sad that they're sad, or they feel mad that they're angry, or they're angry that they're angry, or they're anxious that they're feeling anxious. So they double down on their feelings. So acknowledging their feelings and giving them space is really important. It needs, what else does grief need? But those are the main things that grief. Oh, daily practice. This is the really important one. A daily practice, something that you come to over and over again every day, creates stability in your life. And when you have that stability, because as everyone knows, grief is feral. It hits you when you're not least expecting it. You can just be having a great day, open the refrigerator, and boom, you're grieving bad.
Right.
And this daily practice keeps you steady for those days. It keeps you grounded. And the daily practice can be anything: journaling, painting, singing, yoga, stretching, meditating, but something that you do daily to create stability. So I would say that all grief is processed the same in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the most common problems or situations that people bring to me when they're grieving is that was really interesting to me, because I haven't lost someone in my day-to-day. I've lost someone that I, had relationships with, but they didn't necessarily impact my routine. So for this particular kind of grief, and yes, Susie's right, grief is consistent. I have really learned to focus on embracing your positive routines, because I've had people come to me and say, I've lost my husband of 55 years, or, or my wife, or, and every morning we used to go have a cup of coffee on the porch. And, or I always used to, before bed, we used to watch a movie together. And their grief starts becoming about not just grieving that person, but grieving an entire lifestyle, lifestyle that they created with this other person and that they loved. So in that particular instance, what I have tried to encourage them to do is, Susie mentioned writing letters. I have them write letters, not about their past relationship, but about the new things that they're doing, about the new patterns that they're creating in their life to find joy. And what tends to happen is they start realizing how happy their loved one would be for them, that they are still remembering them, but living joyfully and not wasting the time that they still have here. Their journey is not over. I've had people say, I'm starting to go, I go to bed at 5 o'clock now because there's nothing to do. And so, because you feel that lack of purpose all of a sudden, especially if it's a long-term relationship with a very close person in your life. And, those times, sometimes you look at the clock and you go, that's when we had coffee. That's when we, and I understand that because it's the same in my marriage. And I mean, also there's I haven't changed a light bulb in 30 years. There are also things like that
Oh yeah, that you have to do once that change happens, right?
Yes, exactly. So there's sometimes people feel stuck in that. And part of their problem is that they're still trying to live the same routine that they had with one other person. And that has to adjust even a little bit so that you're still honoring the life that you still have. And by writing the letter and saying, hey, Hank, guess what? I'm taking a pottery class. Or I watched a movie, you would have hated it. Find your humor, find your, again, the relationship doesn't end, it's different.
It's different.
And this is something, if we learn to accept it properly and realize that we're all on journeys and some of them end sooner than others, but we'll all get there. And in the meantime, while we're here, if you at least make efforts, get the help, as we discussed, and make efforts to find joy and purpose in your life, maybe new joy, new purpose, then you'll be able to move forward in a better way. I learned that from my grandmother. When my grandfather died, about a month and a half later, we all, of course, said, Grim, what are you going to do now? And she looked at, and they had a lovely relationship, 65 years. And it was, so what do you want to do now? And she said, I want to do everything that he didn't want to do when he was alive. So I'm gonna go out
all the
and
things.
I'm going to explore, I'm going to blow out my limitations and push my boundaries. because I can think of myself right now. And what was beautiful about that is that there was no guilt in it, because she was honoring her life and still remembering and honoring him.
So there was a mixture there, or there was a combination. She brought him along, even though
Yes.
I saw a comment in the chat, about just the scientific version of death, where really no big change there. Still
Yeah.
the same amount of don't get me started. So I don't want to go down the wrong road, but they're just different. They're not there, but we can bring them along. Um, in the Japanese culture, I think it's called obon, something similar to that, where you honor your ancestors and tell stories about them. Maybe post a picture, and that points to ritual. Which I think you were talking about. Just engaging in ritual intentionally.
Yes.
But when I was listening to both of you talk, it reminded me about the difficulties of getting some people support. And I saw a question that came up in the chat: is how do you get someone to seek help when they need it, and you know they need it. The world kind of knows they need it. How do
Mm.
you nudge someone towards getting help? Susie, I see you shaking your head. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my topics because we all have this idea of what other people should do so that we can feel better, right? So if they would just go for a walk, if they would just get help, if they would just do this thing, and then they could get better, and then I wouldn't feel this grief for them. But the problem is, grief is such a journey that we do by ourselves. We just do it in our own time. And when it's time for this person to get help, they will. But in the meantime, we get to continue having a big, full, beautiful life, and allow them to have their process and do it however they do it. And if it's laying on the couch and watching TV, that's how they're doing it. If it's going out and running marathons, that's how they're doing it. And that's why oftentimes relationships really struggle when two people are grieving the same loss. Like two people, oftentimes divorces happen when they lose a child, because she's grieving one way and he's grieving a completely different way. And they both have an idea of how the other person should be grieving. Like, he's going out and playing golf and I can't get out of bed. Well, that's how he does it. That's how he grieves. He goes out with his friends and plays golf and moves his body. And that's how you do it. You stay in bed, both processing grief. We do it all our own way. So my suggestion is, let that person grieve, and that's how they do it.
That's how they do it. I'm reminded of, I grew up in a house with full of stoics who sometimes didn't shed a tear, and my other side of the family would chastise a little bit them because they didn't show their grief in the way that they were used to. And so there was a conversation that had to be had. Allow people to grieve the way that they grieve. Some people may move to acceptance. And just because you move through the stages doesn't mean that it's over. It's almost like a cycle. It'll come up again. I heard Taryn mention, Inappropriate Laughter, her book, and it reminded me of when grief hit me at an inopportune time. I'm out on a date watching a rom-com at that, and the whiff of popcorn made me think of my friend who I lost to police violence, and I started crying baby tears into my popcorn. My date had no idea what was going on, and again, I responded with inappropriate laughter, just laughing hysterically because although I was remembering him, I was remembering the good times, the fun that we have, what defined our relationship, and I was overwhelmed with joy that I'm I get to continue with him living rent free in my head. Even though he's gone. I know that term's usually used in a negative connotation, but I wanted to add a little bit of humor there. So, Taryn, I wanted to come back to you and ask about, you know, you talked about supporting family members, and LifeGuides was started because we wanted to help caregivers, people who are, supporting people in transition. But what do you do if you feel relief? When someone's finally passed and you've maybe been their caregiver for a period of time. What do you do in that situation?
That is a very natural state that I learned like by the 6th day of sitting in my mother's bedroom that she always kept at like 110 degrees.
Yikes. Okay.
she always
Some like it
wanted all
hot.
of us
Some like
there.
it hot. Yeah.
Yeah. She always wanted all of us there. All 7 kids. Her dream would be for 7 kids to just live in her room with her, watching Lawrence Welk reruns and Murder, She Wrote, and all of those things. And you know, grief in general, like when you're feeling guilty about how you're doing it, when you're feeling just challenged in general about supporting other people and supporting anyone in their grief journey, it's a time to really be patient and kind to yourself. And we're not built that way all the time. So in all of these challenges, learning to be honest with yourself about how you're feeling, learning how to, we talked earlier about how do you get people to have support, and my answer as well is they're going to do it when they do it. But I did want to add that you should offer. You should let them know the offer is on the table in a subtle way. Because I have found, people try to support others in such, nobody knows what to say, right? Nobody knows what to say. So they say things like, oh, you'll get over it, or you'll get, soon time heals everything, or something like that. And there's almost nothing that you can say in those situations to support someone else other than this one phrase that I have found to put the offer on the table without pushing them too much. But saying, I know there are no words that I can offer that will change how you're feeling right now. But I do want you to know that I am always here to listen. And that's it. It's as simple as that. Acknowledging that no one's going to be able to fix it is comforting when you're grieving. When someone else says, I know I can't fix this, but I'm here. I don't know what to do, but if you ask me, I'm here and I will do it. That's all.
I love that saying, I don't know what to do. That is such a powerful thing to say to someone who's grieving.
Yeah.
But when you don't know what to do and you don't know what to say, that is more powerful than not saying anything. Yeah. So I love that. Thank you.
No, that's true, Susie, because when you don't say anything, I have had people who've come to me and said, nobody even reached out. They didn't care.
Yeah.
And it's not that they didn't care. It's that they didn't know what to do because they couldn't fix it, especially spouses. When we're grieving about anything, and again, it doesn't have to be death, it could be getting fired, getting, a friendship ending, something like that. And my spouse, he's a typical guy. He wants to fix that. He wants
Typical guy,
so
always
badly,
wanting to fix.
yeah, to come in and fix it. And I'm very traditionally built too, and I just want him to listen. Please just listen. You don't have to fix anything, but maybe a cup of tea. That'd be nice. Just be there. Just acknowledge that you're human. Acknowledge we're all human. I understand that you're not feeling your best right now. I get that. And I don't know what to do. But if you have an idea of what you'd like me to do, I'll do it.
And I'll add to the end of that real quick, and forgive me for cutting you off. I've mentioned this before, but this is a strong tool. It's the 3Ds to ask someone, do they need distance? Do they want a discussion? Or do they want a distraction?
Yeah.
And, you know, just as you were saying, just so you can show up in the way that they need. Sometimes they may just really want to talk through it. Sometimes they may want to just be distracted just a little bit so that they can maybe reach back to baseline. It's important to find what's important to them and just being there and being vulnerable with them too. It's kind of like getting in the hole with them, but knowing that you have a way out of the hole. Not that you're just going to be stuck in there, the both of you. So we have another question, and I know we're coming up on time. This has been an amazing event. I'm so filled with gratitude that we get to have this conversation and the people sharing your stories in the chat. This is what this space is for people to come together so that we can collectively heal. But the question that came up is, how do you face others who are against you or maybe say mean words to you, specifically when someone close passes and maybe someone was like maybe found guilty of an event? So how do you deal with that challenge? That's so complicated. Any thoughts on that?
I do too. I do, but go ahead, Taryn, if you want to.
I have one thing that I say that I'm sure other people have heard of doing, that I do whenever anybody is mean to me, whether it's someone close to me or you know, at the grocery store. If it's someone close to me and I'm getting disrespectful behavior, sometimes I say, could you please repeat that? Because once, you know, I don't get mad. I just say, could you please repeat that? Because once they start really taking accountability for their words, they might rephrase or change the tone, and that'll go away. But otherwise, I just look straight at them and say, are you okay? Because they're clearly not. If they're saying something when I am grieving, if they are saying something so negative and so mean. And I have learned in my fairly long life that if someone else is treating me with disrespect, it's got nothing to do with me.
Oh, okay.
It's not a reflection of me. It's some kind of misguided stuff that that is not my circus, you know. And I'm okay with them continuing their way. And the reaction that I give, if I don't give any energy to disrespect, then and I walk away, they're left with their own accountability. I didn't give back respect. I didn't respond. I'm sorry, I didn't react. I responded. Because when we react, we usually look back on it and go, wow, that was probably not the best decision I've made. But when you respond, and when you train your brain to respond in that way, are you okay? Because it's not okay to treat people, you know, and don't say this to them, just say, are you okay? And let it lie there. But the real question is, are you okay? Because the way you're behaving is reflective of someone who's not okay. And, you know, I do that. And honestly, I mean, I've also just learned, you know, that laughing in the face of anything. In the book After the Fifth Death, which was my sister Maureen's husband, sweet man, and she called me, and she was in charge of all of the funerals and everything, and she's the oldest. That's what happens. And she called me and she said, Taryn, the funeral home called and we're getting a discount. And I was like, oh my gosh. because we had been reusing flowers. It was a very short period of time, and some of them were really close together. And because of the humor aspect of things, and because of my twisted sense of humor, I called all of my immediate family, and in my best Irish accent, I said, darling, if you're gonna go, go now, because we're getting a discount.
I tried not to laugh. I tried to keep a straight
You
face, but
should laugh. You should laugh. It was ridiculous. It was a ridiculous thing to have happen, understandable. But if, you know, back to this, if someone comes up to you and is mean at a point when you're grieving, I'm sorry, I probably would also kind of laugh in their face a bit, because it's like, are you okay? That was absurd. And holding that humor and understanding that laughter for me is the way, you know, we talked about everybody grieving in a different way. Laughter for me is the way I grieve. And it's the way most of the people in my family grieve. But you always have to honor the way people next to you are doing the grieving. When my mom died, my sister Kate was warming blankets and warming towels in the dryer and putting them on her feet. And my sister Sheila was setting up visitation chairs. And my sister Maureen was doing her thing, and the nieces were cooking. And I had one niece who just was sitting with a cup of tea and couldn't even go up into the room yet. And we all had different ways we were doing it, and we did it. And we laughed at each other all the time, constantly, through the whole process. Because
as you should, because laughter is, like you said, that's your and part of your family's ways of processing. Forgive me, I know I wish we had more time, but we are coming down to the last few minutes, so I do want to re-invite Kira back into the conversation, and we're going to give you two both a little bit of time to just tell us a little bit more about why you do what you do and your wonderful journeys. And yeah, I just appreciate everyone, and I mean everyone, including each of you who are maybe watching this in perpetuity, later down the line, who I'm not interacting with, and the people who are in the chat. You have been an excellent source of support today. Thank you. Kira?
Thank you. Thank you. Wow, what a beautiful conversation. This was, for those of you who are in attendance and watching this from the back end of preparation for this event, I don't think we could have asked for more than what's currently in the chat, and the bonds that have been formed and the conversations that you all have been having. Because this is a really sensitive topic. There's so much to grief in general, and to have permission to navigate it your way is really important. One of the things that I saw over and over in the chat is, how do I navigate grief? I lost my dad, I lost my sister, I lost my grandson. I didn't grieve the death of my dad, and then the death of my mom happened, and I realized I didn't even grieve the first one. Now there's another one. And that's why we have these conversations. I think our intention is to blossom you open a little bit into the fact that there are a lot of feelings that you're feeling, and that you can't necessarily navigate it alone. And the beautiful thing is that you don't have to. You have these amazing guides, and this is just two of our guides who specialize in grief. And they may not be the ones who end up being your guides to help you navigate it. Maybe you find someone else who you're able to co-regulate with even more. But having someone to open these doors for conversation is really important. So Susie and Taryn, I wanted to give you both a moment to um, share what you feel would be what someone needs to hear to schedule their first call with you, and to start navigating their journey with LifeGuides, as potentially having one of you two by their side to navigate these challenges that we're going through, a lot of times alone, but hopefully together after this.
Well, grief needs community, it needs witnessing, and it's something we do alone, but we need support in doing it, if that makes sense. And I think Taryn and I, and there's a lot of guides who can be that person for you. So I highly recommend reach, even if your grief is years and years and years old. Um, it's still something really powerful. And I call grief work deep, like a portal to deep soul work. So it really can get you much farther than you could ever imagine if you have the right person supporting you, especially somebody who understands grief like Taryn and I do. Both of us have come through grief on kind of on the other side of it. And I don't think there's any one way to do it, but there's definitely a way not to do it, which is alone.
I agree with that, as I agree with everything you say, Susie. You're wonderful. The reason I believe people should go, should find a guide to help them with whatever kind of grief they're going through is because sometimes you need someone outside of your circle to process information, because grief can impact our relationships. And if you go to somebody who's trained in doing this, and LifeGuide does such an amazing job of vetting their guides and supporting us so that we can help in the best way possible. And by finding a guide and getting someone who has no connection to your day-to-day life, your work life, your family life, your friends, then you will be able to be completely transparent without worrying about somebody else's feelings or inconveniencing someone by sharing. You know, I've had people say, "Oh, I'm dumping all this on you." No, this is what I do. I just want to listen. I want to be there. I want to, in my whole process as a guide, and I believe all guides do this, I want to provide you with an accurate mirror. So I think that's why it's so important, because I've learned you can't call your sister just just to let it all out. Eventually she'll stop answering the phone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
I
you.
just,
Thank you.
I know we're almost out of time, but there were so many people that lost parents in this chat. And I just want to say to those people that have lost parents is that you have been now initiated into elderhood. This is a rough initiation into elderhood. And it's not something that any of us want. It's not something that we ask for, but we all become elders in the village eventually. And it's hard and it's important work. And I just want to say that you're not alone. Everybody loses their parents if they live long enough.
Thank you. So there's such a beautiful conversation. I dropped the links to schedule your first call with Taryn and Susie. You can also go directly to the LifeGuides platform, select emotional well-being, select the grief and loss topic, and then you'll see all of our guides who are certified specifically in that category. And maybe you're inspired to have multiple guides for multiple things. You've got so much at your fingertips. We have a lot that's coming. We have our upcoming events October, November, and December. We're doing a financial wellness series. So keep your eyes open for the email that gets sent out tomorrow with the recording of this session and then some announcements regarding the next upcoming sessions. And we also have some really great things that are coming down the pipeline in the next few, hopefully, weeks as well. So that's just a little teaser. And the link directly to create an account, I'll get that dropped in just a moment. But you can go to app.lifeguides.com or reach out to the Wellbeing Concierge on the screen itself when you're in our LifeGuides app. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for having this conversation with us. I know it could have gone on much longer, and that's where these conversations get to start getting transferred into a room where it's just you and someone else who's supporting you on your journey. So we're a couple minutes over the hour. Thank you all for being here. The recording will be sent out tomorrow, and we will see you all next month. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.